to this computer. Um, okay, so I wanted to go over, we've been going over the purchase agreement. The last time we went over the sale of buyer's home contingency and all of the pieces in there. So the next one that we use quite often is the septic and well contingency. Um, oh, and interestingly enough, this is the new form, so that's cool. I was just going to say, well, water, hang on. Oh, not quite. So I was just going to say the state, the Minnesota Association is coming out with new forms on August 1st. We're recording this on July 30th. So this form is going to have some minor changes, but it won't change how it's being used, or how it's meant to be used. What they're changing is this well water inspection contingency. A lot of agents and clients in particular see this private well inspection contingency. They assume that means that they're actually testing the well, the mechanics of the well to see if it works. And that's not what we're testing here. We're testing the water quality. Okay. So in the national, or I'm sorry, the state association is going to change just some terms in here to make it very clear that we're not testing the mechanics of the well. We're testing the water comes out of the well. Okay. So it's a little bit of a sidebar. Won't change the mechanics of this whole form. So here we go. Date number one on line one is the date of the purchase agreement that you're writing the purchase agreement. That's that reference date on the very beginning of line one. And number three is going to be that same date. Now, there are some times where your date number one on line one is going to be after you wrote the purchase agreement. Usually that comes in a counter, right? Your buyer decides they are willing to buy a property for $200,000 and no inspections whatsoever. But seller came back and said, well, we want $250,000. And at that price, the buyer isn't willing to waive their inspection contingencies. So then your purchase agreement date, which is on line one of the purchase agreement, is going to be different than your line one. But 90% of the time, these two dates on line one and line three are going to be the same. Okay. Then it goes on to say pertaining to the purchase and sale of the property at blah, blah, blah. This is the address on line five of the property they're purchasing. Okay. Then it goes on to some legalese in here, and I always think it's important to read these things. So it says seller has previously disclosed that a subsurface sewage treatment system, also known as a septic system or an SSTS system, and or private well exists on or serves the property. This purchase agreement is contingent upon inspection of the subsurface sewage treatment system and or private well to determine the condition and status of the following checked items. The following checked items that they're referring to is either this, which is the septic, or on the next page, the well. Okay. Um, then it goes on to say what happens if the inspections are not done and the results are not provided within the time that we specify in each one. If appropriate tests and inspections checked below are not done and results provided within the time specified or waived in writing by buyer, then the party not responsible for obtaining the test and inspection may declare this purchase agreement canceled by written notice to the other party, in which case this purchase agreement is canceled. They both agree to sign the cancellation and earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. So what that means is if we check that the seller's going to get this inspection and the seller doesn't get it done within those whatever calendar days we put in, but the buyer would have the right to cancel the purchase agreement. Okay. Same thing for if we check the buyer, then the seller would have the right to cancel the purchase agreement. Okay. And then earnest money would be refunded. Then we get into the actual test. So this first one here is the septic, subsurface sewage treatment system. What we're saying on line 17 is how many days that the person, the client, whoever's doing the inspection has to get the inspection done and the results provided to the buyer or the buyer's agent. Usually we see this within about 10 calendar days. Sometimes we see less, sometimes we see more. Sometimes it depends on the time of year. If it's winter when you're trying to get a septic inspection test done, some inspectors can get it done in the winter, but it takes longer, right? They have to light a fire to melt the snow and get through the frost to be able to do their borings to make sure that the septic is compliant based on their systems. Okay. So this will change depending on what time of year it is. That's what I meant. What time of year it is, and what's going on with the septic inspectors in your guys' area. Okay. But 10 calendar days is pretty standard. Okay. And those calendar days are based off the final acceptance of the purchase agreement. That's when day zero starts. Okay. Then it goes on to say who is getting this test, who's paying for it, right? You either check the buyer or the seller agrees to obtain and provide to buyer a licensed inspector septic system inspection report or notice indicating if the system complies with applicable regulations within the time specified above. Then goes on to say a valid certificate of compliance for the systems shall satisfy this obligation. Now, this is important. Just because, and you can talk to septic inspectors about this all the time, just because the system is compliant based on county and state rules does not always mean the system works. And the opposite is true. Just because the system is non-compliant does not always mean that the system doesn't work. Okay. When they're looking at compliance as a septic inspector, they are looking to see if it follows the rules of the county and the state that are set. Different counties have different rules. The state obviously has broad rules. And when they're looking at those rules, sometimes the county will have more restrictive rules. That means that the system fails the compliance test, but it's actually in working order. It's just fine. And if it was in the county next door, the septic system would work just fine or would be compliant, right? So when you're telling your buyers about this inspection contingency in particular, let them know that this doesn't guarantee just because you have a compliant septic system, a compliance certificate is good for 3 years. Okay. Once it's done, just because the buyer has that does not mean that the septic is not going to fail at some point in the future. Septic systems are rated on how much water is going through the system, right? And so it's based off the number of bedrooms in the home. That's the sizing of the septic system, of the tanks and then the drain field. Um, if a family of two, say a retired couple, lives in a house, the septic's a 4-bedroom house, they're selling a 4-bedroom house, everything's fine. But then a family of 6 or 7 moves into that house, it could overwhelm the septic system at that point. So a compliance test does not mean that the septic system will then work for the next 3 years. There's lots of things that can happen. The water table can rise up and your drain field won't work anymore if the water table is too high. If you have a chance, there's a lot of pieces to septics and compliance. If you ever have a chance to go to a class or sit down with a septic inspector and talk to them about all these things, it is a lot and it is fascinating to think about our waste and all of the science that goes into our waste that comes out of our homes. But it's important for you guys to know all of those things so you can set expectations with your buyers. Okay. It then goes on to say if the inspection report indicates that the subsurface sewage treatment system, SSTS or septic, is not in compliance with applicable regulations, then the parties may, not have to, may agree in writing on or before the closing date to negotiate an allocation between buyer and seller of these costs necessary to bring the subsurface sewage treatment system into compliance with applicable regulations. What they're talking about here is that it doesn't, just because a non-compliance test comes back, it doesn't mean that the purchase agreement is perfectly canceled, is done, right? It means that the seller and the buyer then open up negotiations again to determine who's going to pay for the septic system to be updated. Or if nobody is, then the buyer will just take care of it after closing. That's also acceptable. Something should be in writing though, because it says on line 27 through 31, in absence of an actual agreement after a non-compliance is received, then either party can cancel the purchase agreement and they'll sign a cancellation. All earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. Okay. So make sure, even if verbally everybody's fine on the phone, verbally doesn't matter when we have an offer. And so it needs to be in writing to follow up so that everybody's on the same page. There is no question that either the seller and the buyer are splitting the cost, that the buyer is going to take it on after they own the property. That's up to them. Now, there are some counties, not all of them. So call the county that you're working in to verify or talk to the other agents in your office who've been doing it for a while. There are some counties that require a septic compliance test to be done once the property switches owners. They require it. So Wadena County is one of them that I know that requires a septic compliance test. Now, this doesn't mean that the title can't be transferred at the county. What it does mean is that once that title is transferred, the county will then send out a letter to the new owners saying you need to get a septic compliance test within the next year. And if the new owners don't, then there's fees and costs associated with that. This is important because you don't want your new buyer to get into the home, think everything's fine. Then they get a notice from the county saying they need a septic compliance test, right? And then their septic fails. Now the buyer has to come up after they've just bought a home, has to come up with $15,000 to $25,000 to put in a new septic system. And the seller's nowhere to be found, right? So negotiating this within the purchase agreement before the purchase, particularly for those counties that require a septic compliance test, is very important. There are some times where buyers already know the septic is going to fail. They know it's a block system. It's not a tank and a drain field. It's very old. It's on an old farmhouse kind of thing. Buyers fine with it. They're already going to update it. They've already put that into their plan. They're going to be redoing some of the stuff in the home anyway. They're fine with that. That's okay. Okay. You don't have to have a septic compliance test. What you do have to do is let your buyer know the repercussions if they don't, and they're buying in a county that requires a septic compliance. Okay. In this other category, you can add other terms to this septic inspection contingency right here. For instance, I've seen instead of using line 23 to 26 that says if it comes back non-compliant, we'll open up negotiations between buyer and seller again. I've seen agents who have written things like if septic, this is not going to be perfect, right? Just FYI. If septic is non-compliant, seller shall at seller's cost bring the septic into compliance. So as a listing agent, You need to be looking at these other categories, making sure that your seller isn't agreeing to something that they might not want to agree to or that they might want to negotiate. Okay. The other pieces, and I have to look if we see any clauses. We have had some clauses about septic and well in particular. One of
Mhm.
them is a delay for the weather. So remember I talked about that sometimes they can't do a septic compliance test right away. Sometimes it's an undersized property. Okay. Um, and these are so fun. So undersized septics. Let's talk about that. So like I said before, septics are their size is based on the number of bedrooms of the house. But how many times do people own a home and they add a bedroom that was an office or they finish the basement and they don't update the septic system? If they do that, depending on the county rules, the septic system might still be compliant. You're still going to get a acceptable compliance test, but it will be undersized. The septic will be undersized for that house because the sellers have added a bedroom. So this undersized clause talks about that. If the septic system is determined to be non-compliant or undersized, seller agrees to complete any repairs, upgrades, or replacement at the seller's expense. So you can add this clause right in here. You click the button and you click OK, and it puts it right in here. Okay. If that makes sense for your situation. Most of the time, I would say when a non-compliant septic system comes back, the buyer and the seller negotiate in some way, or the seller pays some, the buyer pays some, and that's how it goes. Or the seller gives a price reduction, buyer takes it on after closing. That's okay too. How to deal with a non-compliant septic? There's a bunch of different ways that you can do it in negotiations. Once you get a valid certificate of compliance, one that says, yes, it's a compliant, this contingency is removed. Okay. Okay. On to the well. Line 39 is obviously the property address.
I
And
have a
then, yeah,
question
go ahead.
about the septic. Are there any counties that do not allow you to sell a home without it being compliant?
No. So they can't stop the deed from being recorded.
Okay.
And
You
that's
can sell it. It
it,
just might need updating within that first year or whatever the
the
time frame they have. Okay.
exactly. The recording, how the rules are written is the recording of the deed transfer triggers that compliance test, right? It triggers the county to go look to see if there is a compliance on file. And if there's not, then they contact the new homeowner. So it doesn't stop the title from being transferred.
Okay.
It's a good question because a lot of people think that the property can't be transferred until there's a septic compliance on file, and that's not quite how it works.
So if
But when
there's a
you,
new
yeah,
home and it has a
hmm
5 year compliance,
yep,
then if they sold their new home, say 4 years into it,
hmm
you'd be okay.
you'd be fine. Yes,
Even 4 more
absolutely.
years down the road, as long as you don't sell.
Right. Yeah. So, yep. So you're absolutely right. So a new, that's a good point because I forgot to bring that up. A brand new septic system that was just put in, that compliance is good for 5 years. All of these compliance tests, these septic compliance have to be recorded with the county. And so if you're unsure, call the county or look online on their recording systems. However, you have access to it. Each county's a little bit different, right? Um, and so go look. If you can pull a compliance, and I always did this when I was listing properties, I would go and look if they had a valid compliance on file because it would save my people money and negotiation stress if we had it up front, even if the sellers didn't remember. But Joy's right. New system, septic compliance is good for 5 years. Um, uh, Updated system or a septic compliance test that hasn't been touched. is good for 3 years. An existing system is good for 3 years. Okay. Okay. Any other questions about septics in general before I move on? No question is silly. Promise.
Can you hear me? My computer's really slow and lagging because it's kind of stormy here.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully it's not too
So I had to
stormy.
jump off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not too bad, but I just had a question. Like, so say you need to get the compliance test done,
Mhm.
um, contact like I don't know, plumbing or whatever, and like how much is it? Is it pretty expensive to do? Just curious.
Yep, so it depends. It has gotten more expensive
Mhm.
over time. When I first started, a compliance test was about $300. Now they require for a compliance test to be valid, they require a compliance test for the system, but then also a tank integrity test, which determines whether or not the tank is leaking at all. And so, but to do that, they have to pump the tank to be able to look inside the tank and see if it's leaking. So it's actually raised septic inspection prices, anywhere from $600 to $800. That might be different depending on what
Let's see.
area you're in, but that's pretty much the norm. Is $600 to $800 is the
Oh,
new cost. Hmm.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, good
Just
question.
just to know, like, yeah,
Yeah, information is power, man. And I wouldn't hesitate to call some septic inspectors and ask them what their prices are. Um, because maybe you can find one who's just trying to start his business and will do it for less money because he's trying to get clientele in the door, right? That's good for your seller for sure, or your buyer, whoever's paying for it. Hmm.
okay.
Good question. Any other questions? Not right now, anyway. I'm sure you'll have more when you get into something with a septic and well. Hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So let's talk about a well. So again, like I said at the beginning, this contingency is not testing whether or not the well is working, whether or not the components of the well are in good working order. This is testing the water quality. So nitrates, nitrites, coliform are the three main ones that a water test will test for. You can also test for lead and arsenic, which some first-time homebuyer programs require you to test for. Okay. This one is written essentially the same way that the septic one is written, where you click, yep, we want a water test, right? A private well water test done within so many days. Again, 10 is usually normal. A lot of home inspectors are able to pull these water tests for you. Um, and then you choose who's going to pay for it. Either the buyer or the seller will be responsible for obtaining and paying for the water quality test. Okay. Then it goes on to say, if water quality test results show the water is not potable, meaning that any of those things that I just listed are too high based on EPA standards, or otherwise not in compliance with governmental water quality standards, then the parties may agree in writing on or before the date of closing to negotiate an allocation between buyer and seller of those costs necessary to bring the water into potable condition and into compliance with government water quality standards. So what that means is if the water test comes back bad, where the nitrates are too high based on EPA standards, because that's usually what everybody follows, then the buyer and seller can negotiate again. So same thing as the septic one, is that it opens up negotiation again, and then you determine who's going to bring that water quality up to standard. Now, there are a couple different ways to do that. So if it's coliform that they find in the well, that's a bacteria that ends up in the well, you can usually, they call it shocking the well. They will pour bleach down the well, let it sit for a couple hours or a day, and then run all that water and the bleach out of the system. That usually then takes care of that bacteria and the water's potable again. So coliform is pretty easy to fix, right? Nitrates, nitrites, and arsenic need some kind of filtration system that has to be installed in the house or underneath, usually the kitchen sink, for those to be taken care of. Okay. There's not an easy way to just shock the water, shock the well, and take care of that. What's the other one? Lead. Lead can be tricky sometimes. So we still have lead pipes in the United States. We just do. They are around. Most wells in our area do not have lead pipes. Or if they do, they are lead on the outside, and on the inside is some kind of barrier to stop that lead from leaching into the water. Okay. But sometimes it's not the well that has the lead in it. It's not the pipes that has the lead in it. It is literally the faucet that the water test is taken out of. So if you have a high lead test, your first step as either the listing agent or the buying agent is to go buy $150 faucet or have your client do it and install it and to redo the water test. 95% of the time, cheap faucets have lead in them. Okay. And so that will then show in the water quality test, but it doesn't mean that the whole doesn't always mean that the whole system is contaminated with lead. It's usually just the faucet. So those things are just tips and tricks so that you understand when you're talking to your clients, how you fix all of these things. You can all obviously always talk to a water quality test person. Echo Water is who we use in Park Rapids most of the time, and they do a great job, and they can walk you through all of those pieces. Okay. Now, this 49 to 53 goes on to say what happens if they don't have an agreement, if the buyer and seller
Mhm.
don't come to an agreement, if the test fails. Again, it's the same as the septic. They'll sign a cancellation, earnest money will be refunded the buyer. Now, we also have a clause for water. So like I said earlier, um, when, sorry, Megan just left at our office. There are some loan types that require more testing of the water than just the normal nitrates, nitrites, and coliform. And so if that's the case, you as the buyer's agent need to make sure that those extra tests are called out in your paperwork. This one you can see, this is a clause that we've come up with. It's super easy, super simple. Lead and arsenic are along with the other pieces of the water test. Okay. Okay, any questions about the well or the water test? I guess not the well test, the water test. Again, the forms will be updated come the 1st, come Saturday, so that'll be better. One thing about these septic and well contingencies that agents tend to forget is the home inspection contingency is automatically removes itself if you don't come to an agreement within the time frame that you've set within the purchase agreement. And if you don't remember that conversation, go back and look at the purchase agreement videos we did. But that home inspection automatically removes itself if you don't come to an agreement and all parties go ahead and move to closing. Okay. The septic and well contingency, if you don't come to an agreement, there's no time frame that you have to come to an agreement. There's no time frame that you have to negotiate in. This time frame that you're putting on line 41 and line 17 is only for the inspection and the results provided. There is no time frame in which negotiations need to happen. So if your buyer or seller needs these negotiations to be done and completed within a certain amount of time, you should put that in the other category. Otherwise, this contingency lasts all the way to closing, to the closing date. Okay?
I do have a question. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I'm still like so new and just so
exactly
much
what
to
this
learn.
is for.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just have a question. So for like, can you just give me like the basic, like a basic overview of like, so your home inspection, what they all look for the home inspection, and then is the
Mhm.
water like um, the septic system and water inspection? They don't.
Mhm.
Are they in the home inspection or is that just separate?
They're separate. Yep. So
Okay.
it's a great question. So the home inspection is really looking at the structure of the home.
Foundation.
They don't look at appliances. They don't look at any of the utilities, any of the mechanical things. They will look at them and they might tell you that, this water heater, the date is 20 years ago, so it's probably past its life, but they're not plumbers. They're not electricians. And so in their home inspection report, they will put, you need to have a licensed electrician or a licensed plumber come and look at these things. The water test for home inspectors, they will pull the water test, which means they'll take a little vial that they need to send in. They take the water from whatever faucet it needs to be taken from, and they will send it into the lab, which then does the water quality test. They themselves don't do the water quality test. They're just providing that service to take the sample and take it in. You, as an agent, cannot do that because you have an interest in that water quality test being good because your commission is tied to the sale of the home, right? So you got to have an arm's length there between you and the water test in particular. So when the home inspector goes through, they're looking at anything that would need professional to come in and determine whether or not it needs to be fixed, like pest control. They will note that there are mouse droppings in the attic. The home inspector will note that. But in there, they will say you need to have a professional person come in and look at this because we can't determine whether or not there's an infestation, whether it's old, whether it's brand new. We can't do those things. So a home inspector is really your first step. They do not look at the septic at all. Maybe there's some out there who also do a septic inspection. I actually don't know that for sure, but it's two different, not licenses, because home inspectors aren't licenses, but certificates, right? It's two different certificates that they'd have to get to be able to offer that service. Hmm. So when you're looking at getting a septic inspector, they will be named septic inspectors. Any septic installer can either give you a name of a septic inspector or they will do septic inspections as well. Hmm. Water tests, any place where you can get the big jugs of water, Culligan or Echo Water, they'll be able to do water tests. Does that answer your question?
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really good question because I think buyers in particular assume that the home inspector, because they're paying a good amount of money for a home inspection, they assume that they're going to go through and tell them everything that's wrong, period, always, right? But
Like
they're not
everything.
right. But they don't, particularly the electrical, the plumbing, and the mechanical, right? That's not their job. They can see big issues
Okay.
and will usually call them out. But again, in their report, they'll say you need to have somebody licensed come in and look at this because they're not trained for that.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So sometimes you will be having multiple inspectors go into the property. So during the home inspection, you have so many days, right? Let's say 15 days. Home inspector comes back. He says, "Oh my gosh, this electrical system looks really scary. You need to have an electrical inspector come in here and look." You still have within that 15 days to go get an electrical inspector and have them come into the property, right? And to negotiate. Same thing with the plumbing, right? If there's something wrong with the plumbing that the base home inspector finds out or sees, looks at, you still have time within that inspection period. Because in the purchase agreement, the inspection, well, let's go back to that real quick. I have it right here. In the purchase agreement, it says any inspections, any. It doesn't have to be a home inspection, right? Uh, it could be just an electrical inspection. Buyer's a contractor themselves. They don't need a home inspector to go through the property, but they're not an electrical engineer, so they do want to have that person come through. But it says any inspection that the buyer wants, they can have on that property. Okay. The only caveat to that is if anybody has to cut into anything, do intrusive testing, then that depends on what's put on line 178. Okay. What this doesn't count for is the septic and well, the septic and the water, because that's a different contingency held at a different point in the purchase agreement and then followed up with the addendum that we've been going over. They're really great questions. I appreciate having you guys here because I forget sometimes the stuff that I know and the stuff that the public assumes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think I went through all of that. Obviously, for this to be valid, seller and buyer both have to sign and date, and then it becomes a part of the purchase agreement. Okay. Do you guys have any other questions there on what
I
that
have
means? Yeah,
just a
go ahead.
quick question. So when you lift the contingency,
Mm-hmm.
you need to fill out any form or say, hey, we've lifted the contingency.
Yeah. So in writing, always in writing with signatures. Always, always, always. So what
Is
you would
there
do
a
is
form?
there's not, you would just do an amendment. And if both the water test and the septic come back fine, right? Their tests are fine. You would just say in the amendment, buyer and seller agree to remove septic and well contingency and move forward to closing. It's
Okay.
that easy, right?
Okay.
If there's something that you need to negotiate between the two parties, again, you use an amendment, but then you'll lay out exactly what's negotiated between the two parties and what happens if that doesn't happen.
Okay.
So, right. So if the seller agrees to get a new septic system installed before closing, make sure in that contingency you're also writing what happens if the seller doesn't do that. You can escrow money depending on the loan and the lender and the title company. Like there's caveats there, but you can escrow, meaning hold back money from the seller after closing to pay for work that needs to be done. Okay. That's usually 1.5 times the amount of the bid that you get. So if you get a bid for $10,000 for a new septic system, installer can't put it in until after closing. Buyer and seller want to move on with their life and still move forward with the purchase. You can escrow 1.5 times, so that would be $15,000 from the seller or whoever's paying for it at closing. That money is held in an account at the title company. There are charges associated with that, just FYI. They're pretty small, but they're still there. That money's held in that escrow account until the installer submits their final bill. Then the title company pays the installer, and whatever money's left over goes to either the buyer or seller, whoever the money was held back from. Okay, so that's one way that you can do it in an amendment.
All right.
Um,
So
they
I
can
wrote
also,
down use an
Mhm.
amendment to lift the contingency or to clarify who's paying what and how and when.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem. Okay. What other
So,
questions?
quick
Yeah,
question not related to well and septic.
yeah.
So I have a home that the purchase agreement was accepted
Okay.
and it was contingent on an inspection, and the inspection was done this morning.
Yep.
Do I also just write up my own lifting the contingency of the inspection?
I always felt that that was best practice. So the home inspect or the inspection contingency within the purchase agreement will automatically expire. So
Right, because I
if
had
nothing,
5 days and that's Sunday night, so
right. And so if it's up to you and the listing agent and the buyer and seller at that
and for
point.
peace of mind, they might want to know before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes, every bit of it. And so I always recommended if my buyer had called me and said, "Yeah, we're good. The home inspection came back fine. We're not going to ask the seller for anything." I would follow it up with an amendment, no
Okay.
matter how close we are to the expiration of the
Okay.
inspection date, right?
Yeah. That's what I was
Um,
thinking.
yeah, but you
And there's
can.
not a form, just write one up.
Yep, that's
Thank you,
exactly.
Remy.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Remy. And
Okay.
again, just removing a home inspection contingency is very easy, right? Buyer agrees to remove their home inspection contingency or inspection contingency and
Yeah.
move forward to closing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. See, good questions. I like these. Um, we should have a Stump Katie training,
Really. I know
right?
you
We
know the
should.
answer to all my questions.
Wow, I've been answering questions like this for 5 years. I wasn't this good at the beginning, I promise.
You've gotten a lot of practice.
I have. Exactly.
You
Yep.
can ask me parenting questions.
Right. You've had a lot of practice.
Oh,
Yes.
yes, I have. Still doing it.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay. Well, if that's all the questions you guys have, that's all I've got for you today.
Thank you.
And no problem. And we'll see you guys all next week. We have the all team meeting on Tuesday. So that's at 9 a.m. And then we'll do the new agent mastermind again at 2 o'clock on Thursday.
Okay.
Okay. Um,
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Have a good day.
Bye.
You too.